Welcome to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. We're applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day so that you can connect the eternal with the everyday and get ready to head out into the world that God so loves in ways that honor Jesus. So let's get started. This is The Reconnect.
Encouraging you to live as an ambassador of God's kingdom in the world. This is The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms out wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power we will go. By your spirit we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
Applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day, that's what The Reconnect is about. Hey, I'm Paul, filling in for Carmen this week, and okay, there's a lot of stuff that should be on your Pray the News radar. For example, over the weekend, there were some various attacks and counterattacks in the Middle East between the United States and Iran amid the nominal ceasefire. A lot of measured but deliberate strikes in response to Iranian aggression, the U.S. says. Plus, the potential for a U.S. peace deal remains unsigned as of yesterday, as of this morning, really, after Trump asked for significant edits to the draft document. Sources with knowledge of the matter told Axios recently. Pray about this situation again for a resolution, for a good resolution. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered deeper penetration into Lebanon on Sunday, expanding the ground offensive against Hezbollah despite a ceasefire that's been in place since mid-April. As a matter of fact, Israeli forces seized Beaufort Castle, which is a 12th century Crusader-era fortress with this deep incursion into the country. We'll probably talk more with Luke Moon about this tomorrow on the Reconnect when he joins us. He's from Generation Zion, and he'll help us understand what's happening in the Middle East. Meanwhile, in Newark, New Jersey, we had the ICE protests here in the Twin Cities area where I live earlier this year. Well, there's been some protests happening in Newark, New Jersey, outside what is a detention center, the Delaney Hall Immigration Detention Center. And there's a curfew in effect, so pray for that situation as well. Now, applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day, when it's news, stuff like that, I can do a little. When it comes to sports, I am not the guy to do that, but thankfully in studio is the guy who can. Ryan Mitchell, along with being the producer extraordinaire he is here at Faith Radio, he's the co-host of The Champion, unlike any other podcast, and just a guy who knows sports like the back of his hand.
It's very kind of you to say.
Well, and it is an interesting time of year with all that's going on. We have 2 championship series set. Mm-hmm. Which one do you want to tackle first?
Well, I'm much more interested in the hockey side. You know this, Paul. I love basketball. I've loved it since I grew up, but the NBA has just changed a lot over the years, so it's not my most cup of tea, if you will, to
You're
watch.
You're more of a college guy.
Exactly,
yeah.
Yes. I mean, compelling matchup nonetheless. Spurs and Knicks, that'll start in San Antonio. Game 1 will be Wednesday night in that best of 7, and then the best of 7 for hockey. The Stanley Cup Finals will start in Carolina. Hurricanes and Golden Knights starting tomorrow night.
Carolina? It's South. Okay.
They've been knocking on the door many, many years.
The Canadians, well, here's the thing. It's been a 33-year drought.
I know.
For the Canadian teams to win a Stanley Cup, and it's going to continue. And
yep.
All these southern cities, hockey, I just don't get it.
I mean, Tampa Bay had a great run.
Yeah.
Florida won the last 2 years. It's been a lot of it. So it's been even more south than it is this year. Yeah.
I know. What are some of your thoughts? Who are the people we should be watching in these?
Yeah. Jacob Slavin is one I would definitely shout out for the Carolina Hurricanes. He's a believer, super loud about his faith, talks about child sponsorship all the time. He's one of the best defensemen in all the NHL. So you're going to see him number 74 for Carolina playing in the series this weekend. On the NBA side, I mean, I can think of a few. Josh Hart for the New York Knicks. He's a believer, has been talking about his faith this year. They have a deep Villanova connection just outside of Philadelphia. There's 3 Villanova guys who play for the New York Knicks. So I can just give you a bunch of names, Paul, but I can stop there and just leave it at a few.
Which one of these guys really stand out to you? I mean,
Jacob Slavin. Jacob Slavin, big time.
Tell us about him.
Yeah, so like I said, defenseman for the Carolina Hurricanes, one of the best in all the NHL. just talks about his faith all the time. He's probably early 30s-ish. He just played on Team USA this year. He was on the Olympic team that won the gold medal, and so he's at the peak of his athletic career in the sport right now, and it would be cool to see him win a Stanley Cup in a few weeks.
All right. We were talking a little beforehand, and one of the things you have concerns about, especially with the NBA and the championship game hitting New York.
Yeah.
We got the convergence of so much sports right now.
Yeah, truly, potentially a once-in-a-lifetime event with the World Cup being in the United States, and there'll be games in Canada and Mexico too, but the bulk of them in the U.S., and that's starting a week from Thursday. And there's potential for Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Knicks and Spurs, if it gets to a Game 6, to be hosted at the famous Madison Square Garden in New York City, in Manhattan, and then on the same day, a World Cup game being played with France, who has a big following as well and is a threat to win the whole thing. So sports ticket prices we could sit here and talk about for a long time, Paul. This month specifically, with some things happening in America, there are going to be big, big numbers being spent by people.
Okay, one more thing. Tell us a bit more about your podcast.
Yeah, we drop episodes every other week. Myself and Wyatt Morrell, who's the host for the Bill Arnold Show that you hear each and every afternoon and evening here on Faith Radio Network. We do the show together. We talk to athletes, broadcasters, coaches, really anyone who has a story and something that they're doing currently in the sports world that they're able to share on in a compelling way. And yeah, we trust the Lord to lead us and guide us to guests moving forward. And our next one will be dropping just in a few days here on Wednesday the 3rd.
All right. So you can find that on go to myfaithradio.com and look at podcast, or go to myfaithpodcast.com. You can find it there. Otherwise, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Well, again, thanks for listening to Faith Radio and the Reconnect. If I were to ask you to point to the purpose, what is the point? What's the purpose of the gospel of Jesus? How would you answer that? Maybe you'd say, well, to save sinners from sin. Or maybe you've heard the phrase, depopulate hell. I'm not saying these are wrong or untrue. They are true as far as they describe. But is there more to God's saving work through Jesus than just that? How does the word redemption fit in? Redeemed from what and to what? Pastor Harrison Perkins, author of Created for Communion with God, joins us in 90 seconds. We're going to talk about it. Thanks again for listening to Faith Radio. Again, I'm Paul, filling in for Carmen here on The Reconnect. And, after Adam and Eve ate the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they hid from God. God came to walk with them in the cool of the day, but they didn't come to meet him. God called out, Adam, where are you? Now, we know that since God is the creator of the world, he knew where Adam was. He knows all things. Adam's location wasn't lost to him. So why did he ask that question? What was lost? Joining me now here on The Reconnect to help us think about this and think about the first two chapters of the Bible is Pastor Harrison Perkins of Oakland Hills Community Church in Michigan, author of the new book, Created for Communion with God, The Promise of Genesis 1 and 2. Harrison, thanks for joining us here on Faith Radio.
Thanks so much for having me. It is great to be with you. I'm excited about the opportunity.
Now, Harrison, oftentimes when we come to the first two chapters of Genesis, we come with a lot of theological and conceptual baggage. Not that it's unimportant stuff that we bring to it, but it is baggage nonetheless. So how does that block us from seeing what God is trying to more importantly communicate to us through the first two chapters of Genesis?
Yeah, sometimes I think, keep presuming the same questions when we come to a text. And those can be good questions to ask. And what a lot of us are asking when we come to Genesis 1 and 2 is, well, since this is about how God made the world, how does this relate to science, in the mainstream sense? And what do we make of that? Where's the conflict? Is there a way to see agreement? And those are important questions. And yet, at the same time, and need to be answered somewhere, yet at the same time, we can forget, with as much emphasis as we've placed on that, the traditional view of Genesis is that God inspired it through Moses as he was covenanting with Israel at Mount Sinai. And that means that even these first two chapters of the whole Bible are not a disconnected scientific account standing out there by itself, but it is an address to God's people. And it's an address about our relationship with him. And we should remember that as we come to even the opening words of the Bible. It is summoning us to know something about our Creator and to know about how we relate to him. And certainly we need to keep thinking about those other questions too. But we also need to remember that if we have displaced our attention from being on the Creator by thinking more about the creation, well, we may well have missed the point that God wanted us to take away about his care for us and how we ought to know him.
True. And okay, I could get geeky here with you, Harrison, because, I like going to, you talked about the first few verses, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I look at what the people of Israel at that time would have heard, say, from the Egyptians. And this was true of the Babylonians, too, and some of the other common creation stories that they may have been exposed to outside of Yahweh. And it would generally be, in the beginning, there was stuff. Mm-hmm. And out of that, God arose, or gods, I should say, arose. And all of a sudden, again, we could geek out on this like crazy because that is a huge truth that they were dealing with. But again, getting back to God's design. And again, we can talk about creation. We can talk about intelligent design. These things are important, but you started hinting at it. Because this is a covenant book, what are we designed for?
Yeah, I mean, even that actually holds together with the things that you were saying there, because in so many of the other creation stories outside of the Bible, the story begins with absolute chaos.
Yeah.
There's fighting between gods. Then gods don't like the people they've made, or even if they didn't make them, people who kind of grew out of the slain bodies of other gods and that sort of thing. And so everything really is a mess. And the Bible's account of creation shows us how, one, the true God isn't dependent on anything to have made the universe. He didn't need stuff already to be there to make the universe as we know it. He didn't need stuff that was already there to make us. He crafted us by in the universe and us as the creatures made in his image by speaking. He just brought us into existence by command, because he is the sovereign creator. And when we see that, well, we see that God is also developing a beautiful creation. And that it's not that everything was a wreck and things had to be subdued. There are things that he improves as time goes on, but the culminating aspect of bringing together a beautiful creation is how he made a creature in his image, Adam and Eve, humanity, who was after his likeness and in his image, that we would have a relationship with him. And so Genesis 1 and 2 is certainly a corrective to lots of stories about how the world began in Israel's own time. It's also a corrective for us because a lot of times in our culture we think we're made for ourselves.
Yeah.
And God is there to, he's the Santa Claus in the sky, or the kindly grandfather who just, is on hand to give me what I want. And so we're made for our own experience. And what Genesis 1 and 2 tells us is actually we were made for a relationship with God. And that's where we'll find our best flourishing. The only real, genuine flourishing that we will have is if we're living properly in relation to the God who made us and living in the way he made us to live. And that's where we find our groove, so to speak, and operate rightly, and actually will be not only the most satisfied, but the happiest. And a lot of times that's contrary to the assumptions that people have.
And that brings up the whole idea again. Okay, we're getting back to the issue of design and purpose, but you also touch on, you hit on the word order. Because if you look at the Genesis 1 account, It's orderly. And as opposed to what they would have heard in the theology of the Egyptians, where everything just kind of rose out of chaos and there was conflict and all this other stuff, that's not the picture at all, is it?
No. It's amazing kind of how we tend to pay attention to the things that interest us, and our focus can, I guess our eyes can glaze over when we're reading about the things that don't immediately spark our curiosity. But, it's amazing how so many times throughout the creation narrative, we find phrases like, each according to their own kind. God built plants and animals to reproduce according to their own kind. Well, that's an order that if it wasn't there, an orderliness that if it wasn't there, well, life would be very difficult. Imagine being a farmer and, you plant seeds and it may have the equal chance of sprouting corn, a rock, or a chicken.
No fun.
That would be... Yeah,
I grew up a farm boy, so you're just kind of going, yeah, that would be chaos.
Right. And yet God designed the world so that things reproduce and even are governed according to certain orders. We think of order as kind of a stodginess. We don't always like it. But actually, when we come down to things, we couldn't live without it. And there ought to be something beautiful and comforting and enjoyable about good order. It puts things in relation to one another. Not everything that's good has to be spontaneous. There is something that is nice about being able to depend and expect that, the sun will come up every day. And its center, its force of gravity holds us in our orbit in our solar system. So that, we kind of have a general idea of when seasons are going to change. I live in Michigan. That's kind of a fluid thing right now.
I'm in Minnesota. Same 70. Difference, man. Same.
Yeah, it could be 70. It could be 40. But, we have a general notion that, well, within a month, that's going to stabilize a little bit. And if we weren't in an orderly orbit, as a planet, we wouldn't be able to have that. And so much of our lives depends on how God has built the creation. And, so that even, it's an amazing thing that really the universe and our galaxy, he built with a certain order, with, I guess there's 8 planets now that Pluto lost its, I'm still a bit put out of sorts about that. I guess it's not a planet anymore, but, there's 8 planets and other cosmic bodies that if they weren't where they are, our planet wouldn't stay where it is. And God did so much of that to make sure that we've got a place to live so that we can live, so that we can know him.
So that we can know him. We're talking again with Harrison Perkins. He's a pastor at Oakland Hills Community Church in Michigan, and we're going to continue our conversation in just a few moments. And okay, we saw what God made. What led to it falling apart? We'll continue that conversation in just a moment here on The Reconnect on Faith Radio.
Hey, I really like it that you listen whenever you want, wherever you are, at all times of the day and night. That is so cool. So thank you so very much for all the ways in which you support this ministry with your prayers and words of encouragement. Right now, in order for this podcast to be available everywhere all the time for everyone, I actually need your help. Could you support this podcast right now so that more people in more places at every hour of every day could hear about Jesus and grow in their relationship with him? Click the link in the show notes or give now at myfaithradio.com. And thank you so much again for listening to this podcast.
Well, again, thanks for listening to The Reconnect. I'm Paul, filling in for Carmen. When John Calvin pastored St. Pierre's Cathedral in Geneva, he started out every service with this call to worship. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. That's from Psalm 124, verse 8, which also sounds a lot like the start of Psalm 121, one of my favorite Psalms. Why was that the call to worship? Why did Calvin think his congregation needed to hear that truth week in and week out? We're continuing our conversation with Pastor Harrison Perkins. He is the author of Created for Communion with God, The Promise of Genesis 1 and 2. And, I was talking with somebody else, Harrison, about when God was creating this orderly universe, and you hear all these pronouncements of good, 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 and finally very good. And they told me, well, think about it. 3-part harmony. You had the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit singing 3-part harmony, that good. That would have been cool to hear, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, he created beautiful. He created wonderful. But then something happened that broke the communion, what I was hinting at the start, because God looked for Adam and Eve in the cool of the day to commune with them, and they hid. They hid because of what you call the trial of the trees. Why did God if God wanted communion with us, why did he put a trial in there?
Well, one of the things that's actually fascinating about that is not so clear in Genesis 1 and 2 itself, but as we look at other portions of Scripture, so Psalm 8, for example, and especially as it's interpreted in Hebrews 2, how there's, even from creation, there was this forward motion where we could have known deeper communion with God. I mean, if you think about even that command as that blessed command, as God created male and female after his image, he said, go have dominion, be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. In other words, there is a garden, a special place where God met with Adam and Eve, and yet there was the rest of the world that still needed to be cultivated. And so there was a prospect for even greater at the beginning. And we see hints of that like in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul is arguing for the resurrection, where our bodies will become glorified and incorruptible, and such an amazing thing. And yet he appeals to Genesis chapter 2, before sin entered, to say, if there was a natural body, then there would have to be this spiritual, incorruptible body. Certainly he doesn't mean disembodied by spiritual. He means characterized primarily by the presence of the Holy Spirit. In other words, the same state that we will know and experience when Christ returns and raises us all from the dead and gives us bodies like his, was held out to Adam at the beginning if he had been faithful. And yet we have to ask the question, okay, well, how might he have obtained that blessed state? Well, the traditional Christian answer is by obeying God. But when we come to this, then we say, though, well, how much obedience would have been necessary? We're creatures. We can't obey enough to demand a reward from God. And so actually this tree of the knowledge of good and evil was put in place as a test, which shouldn't have been overwhelming. The test with when God made Adam upright and with original righteousness, stamped with his image, marked with his own character, able to be good. This test with this tree, even against the serpent, should have been like an Olympic high jumper trying to jump over a rope on the ground.
Yeah.
Right? It shouldn't have been that. And this is the part of the insanity of sin, that it doesn't make sense, and it shouldn't be the case. And yet it wasn't that this test with the tree then was a cruel or harsh trial. No, far from that. It was a way for God to give Adam a moment to have passed through that demonstration of obedience that should have been easy for him, so that he could have obtained this even deeper experience of blessedness and communion.
Yeah.
And a lot of that can be foreign to people, I know, but I think one of the things just to grab hold of that it marks is, yes, Adam and Eve's experience was greatly blessed, even perfect in a certain sense, at the beginning as soon as God made them. And it also shows us God's abundant generosity, that as good as that state was, he can always outgive himself in being good to his people and offer us this higher blessing. And we look forward to knowing that when Christ returns.
Again, we're talking with Harrison Perkins, author of Created for Communion with God. We have just about a minute and a half left, Harrison. And, you know, in all you talked about, in light of the fall, when actually in the light of the thousands of years of misery we humans have suffered because Adam failed the trial of the trees, Jesus is good news in all this. Can you summarize that? Because that's where we need to land.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, even as you highlighted that from the Psalms, that our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. We think of the universe's existence as, you know, one of the most profound, astonishing realities that we could think of. And yet, if God is the one who upholds all of that, how able must he be to take care of us who are so much smaller than the universe and gravitational structures and all of that. He is able to uphold us, and we know that because he can do the bigger thing. And he's done that primarily, you know, most focusedly in dealing with our sin through the Lord Jesus Christ. One of the astonishing things is that as Adam brought death into the world through a tree, well, Jesus Christ brought life into the world through a tree. Now, one of the shocking parts is that both Adam and the first Adam and the last Adam both died at that tree. At least death came upon them, right? But for the Lord, and Adam's death brought death to us all. But the Lord Jesus Christ, as he died on the cross, that tree, because accursed is everyone who is hung on a tree, Paul tells us, quoting Deuteronomy. Well, he died a cursed death in our place to endure that curse for us. And his tree reverses that first tree, bringing life and justification, right standing with God, a renewed relationship where we are accepted and forgiven, and even the promise of glory of knowing him face to face in everlasting life. And so all of this, even the first chapters of the Bible, point us to the riches of God's grace in the Lord Jesus Christ, and opens up how he has made us new and brought us back to himself, to the very thing for which he made us, a relationship with him.
Which brings us probably to the last two chapters of the Bible, which you better write a book on to kind of bookend this thing here. But anyway, Harrison, thanks for joining us this morning on The Reconnect. Again, Harrison Perkins, author of the book Created for Communion with God, The Promise of Genesis 1 and 2. Again, Harrison, thanks for joining us here on Faith Radio.
Thanks so much for having me.
This is The Reconnect, helping you apply the mind of Christ to the matters of the day. Carmen is off. I'm Paul, filling in this week, actually. Have you ever heard of Sir Arbuthnot Lane and the colectomy craze? Back in the early 1990s in London, a prominent surgeon, Sir Arbuthnot Lane, hypothesized that human beings' upright bipedal posture placed unnatural stress on the digestive tract. He believed this caused intestinal stasis, which allowed toxins to ravage the body, leading to a whole variety of maladies, or so he thought. Things like headaches, mental and physical lethargy, epilepsy, rheumatoid arthritis. So what was his solution? Colectomy, the removal of the large intestine. What was the consequence? Well, he promoted it as a miracle cure for so many things, but the procedure turned out to be dangerous, carried high mortality of 30 to 40%, and it did not solve any of the problems. It was a crazy idea. How could seemingly intelligent people, rational people, fall for such lunacy? Are we any better today? Jay Budziszewski joins me in about 3 minutes here on The Reconnect as we talk about not one, but a pandemic of bad ideas, pandemic of lunacy. That's coming up here on Faith Radio. In the area of praying the news, hopefully you are praying for what's happening in Africa, in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as Uganda, with the spread right now of a new strain of Ebola. And of course, just a few weeks ago, there was a lot of talk around the hantavirus, these viruses that could spread. And a lot of us are still kind of struck by what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic of the early 2020s. Hey, I'm Paul. Thanks again for listening to Faith Radio. One thing we definitely learned during the pandemic, many people may be infected, but practically all of us were affected. And that's the nature of widespread outbreaks and pandemics. Not all pandemics are medical issues, though. So many are social and cultural. Joining me now is Jay Budziszewski. He is a professor of government and philosophy at the University of Texas, Austin. He's written widely on issues of natural law, self-deception, happiness, purpose, and also widely read on the area of unraveling and possibly restoration of our common culture. He's got over 20 books. Jay, you've been a busy guy. Over 20 books, your latest being called The Pandemic of Lunacy: How to Think Clearly When Everyone Around You Seems Crazy. It's good to have you with us here on The Reconnect.
Thanks. I'm glad to be with you.
It is good. Now, like I said, you've written a lot of books, and your new one about the pandemic of lunacy, you actually, it's not a thick book. It's not, and each of the pandemics you deal with in kind of, I would almost, like an op-ed, a quick read, but you really help summarize these. You have like 30 different lunacies, these bad ideas that have taken a grip on our society. I'm sure many people listening, they'll go through the pages of even just reading the table of contents, and they would agree with you, at least in theory, hopefully in practice. Some they may completely disagree with. So let's start with the question: how can you tell when a bad idea? What is a bad idea? What is a lunacy?
You know, it used to be the case that when a student would go off to the university, or when somebody would make his way in life and try to be grown up, what we didn't encourage people to throw out their common sense, but we expected them, as they matured, to elevate their common sense, to throw out things that were inconsistent, but to say, well, you know, what the whole human race has believed for almost all of its history is very likely to be true. There may be something wrong, but we don't just discard it, but we keep the baloney meter, but we don't just throw it out. Now, these days, when we go off to school, especially sometimes when we go into big corporations that are pressuring with us with certain social policies, we are encouraged to throw out our common sense. We're encouraged to disconnect our baloney meters, and to substitute crazy theories that we've made up that don't have much connection with reality. So I think a large part of it is to just pay attention to the reality outside of us, and not be frightened by the people who around us who say, "Oh, history is against you. Everything that you've ever been taught is wrong."
Yeah, and the problem is I checked history. It wasn't against me anyway. A few moments ago, I mentioned I said about the pandemic, many were infected, but practically everyone was affected. Now, let's take one of the lunacies that you talk about. There are like 30 lunacies, and we don't have time to go through all of them. I would encourage people to get the book to read through them, which if you want the link to the book, just ask me on the text line 877-933-2484. We're starting June, and a lot of people talk about June as Pride Month. And this brings us back to the whole sexual revolution that started, well, it actually started before the 60s, but it really hit that critical mass in the 1960s, and the redefinition of marriage and human sexuality. And one of the lunacies you talk about is the uncoupling of sex from its consequences has no consequences. Let's dig into that to help illustrate what we're talking about, why this is a lunacy.
Sure. You know, have you ever been to a class, maybe, or a group for young people where they were encouraged to be chaste before marriage, and they were told, well, you know, if you aren't, you might get a disease or you might get a pregnancy. They're not being presented with a vision of the holiness of married life, or of the beauty of it, of forming a family. Instead, they're just being warned against consequences. And so we get the idea that if only we can do away with those consequences, just keep from getting pregnant, just keep from getting a disease, use an antibiotic if you do get a disease, then everything's okay. That attitude actually brings about its own bad consequences. And this is why the sexual revolution has become so serious. It didn't start with gay marriage or something like that. It started with something very simple, contraception. We thought, oh, now we can break the connection between sexuality and turning the wheel of the generations. Children aren't important. And if children aren't important, then marriage isn't important either, because there doesn't have to be any bond between the two procreative partners. Now, this is what I mean. One thing leads to another. The very attempt. There was one poet, T.S. Eliot, who once remarked that we are dreaming of systems so perfect that no one has to be good. That's a delusion.
Yeah. Let's dig into this a bit further, because there's a few strands we can pull here. One is, and you mentioned it right there, about how even us who want to see more chaste behavior bought into the lie, the lunacy, where you think it's just about the consequence. And what the Bible and so much more points to in creation is something larger and more beautiful than just an issue of consequence avoidance.
Yes, that's right. And so much of our moral, what I'll call our moral apologetics, our explanation of why we live as we live as Christians, so much of it fails to present the vision that the Bible presents and that the great teachers of the faith have presented, the vision of this beautiful and holy life. Instead, we think that it's just a set of don'ts. Well, there are some don'ts, but those don'ts are there as guardrails to protect the beauty and the integrity of that wonderful life. And we need to start by talking about that life and then explain the guardrails.
Mm-hmm. And going even further into this, when we buy in to a lot of that, even though we're trying to be chaste, but oftentimes you see people who say they're Christians and in principle they agree with what you're trying to say, but they don't live that way. That's a lunacy.
No. A lot of people who consider themselves Christians are really leading a sort of a double life. They say, well, yeah, I want to follow God's moral law, but not that. They'll say, and this is okay because I love my partner. But of course, if it is going to be that kind of love, it isn't really love, because love is a commitment to the true good of the other person. And careless and casual sex with your partner is not really for either your own true good or for the true good of the other person. It demeans, it dehumanizes the other person. It makes it all about pleasure. It also fools us, because sex, God designed sex. He invented it for us. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel right. Now, the difficulty is it will have that effect. It's been designed so well. It will have that effect even if you're doing it in the wrong way or with the wrong person or at the wrong time or outside of marriage. And so we think, well, I feel right about this. Well, of course you feel right about that. It is, this is your sexual inclination, which is built into you. It doesn't mean it is right. You have to think, what is this sexual inclination for? Sex is for turning the wheel of the generations and uniting the two partners in turning that wheel in a special love that is unique of all the other kinds of love. That's what it's about. Everything follows from that.
Again, we're talking with Jay Budziszewski. He's a professor down at the University of Texas in Austin, author of the new book, Pandemic of Lunacy. You're not the only Jay Budziszewski, are you? And that's caused some problems.
It has caused some problems. One other person whose name began with the initial J said that people were confusing me with him and he was losing clients.
Ooh, well, sorry, but when you got the name Budziszewski, what do you... Well, anyway, as we continue, one thing you may notice when you read the New Testament, especially when you're looking at the books of the Apostle Paul, his letters, you notice he was addressing some crazy, false ideas and distortions that were creeping into the church. Legalism in Galatia, some early Gnostic ideas in Colossae, and Corinth. Oh, so many bad ideas that he had to address. Well, Paul was answering a lot of those bad ideas by pointing them back to the core realities of Jesus and the gospel. It's like he was trying to inoculate them. Can we do the same for ourselves and our communities? When we return with Jay in just a few moments, let's talk about ways we can inoculate ourselves and help others build up the immunity. This is the Reconnect without Carmen today. I'm Paul filling in here on Faith Radio.
Psst, have you heard the news? Listening just got better with the new and improved Faith Radio app. No more restrictions, no more static, no more missing your favorite shows. Now, listen when you want, where you want, and share with everyone. When you need hope, encouragement, Jesus, it's right there on your phone. Text the word app to 877-933-2484 and follow the link or search Faith Radio Network in your app store.
In reading the history of nations, we'll find that, like individuals, they have their own whims and peculiarities. We find that whole communities fix their minds on one object and go mad in its pursuit, that millions of people become simultaneously impressed with one delusion and run after it, till their attention is caught up in some new folly more captivating than the first. Those are words from a 1841 book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay. It's how Jay Budziszewski starts out his book, The Pandemic of Lunacy, which, again, if you'd like a copy of it, want to get a link to so you can get a copy, ask on the text line, 877-933-2484. Otherwise, connect with Jay at undergroundthomas.org. Jay, that's a great way to start the book. That kind of set the tone for me as I got ready to read it. Let's back up to various pandemics you're addressing here. Pandemics usually fade when herd immunity is built up. Do you think that we individually and corporately in our churches and communities can build up a herd immunity?
Well, I do think it's possible for two reasons. This is a Christian broadcast, so I am free to say that one reason that we can build this up is by the grace of God. But even apart from the redeeming grace, there's also the common grace that God has given to the whole world, and that keeps the central world from becoming even worse than it would be otherwise. We can appeal to this. People have not lost sight of absolutely everything. I spoke earlier of the universal common sense of the human race, and that exists even to some degree, even in a soiled, fragmented condition, even in the unredeemed world, so we can open our eyes. And I think that's a lot. Now, also, we have to be brave. So many of us have been frightened into thinking that history, meaning the last 15 minutes, is against us. But God is for us. His providence is for us. His image in us is for us, and the last 15 minutes don't matter. He does, so we don't have to despair. Still, another thing I would say is this. This helps in building up immunity. We don't have to do everything at once. Many of us, depending on our gifts, may be social activists or politicians or write columns in newspapers, but we don't have to do everything. We need to do what we can, what's right at hand. What we should never forget that our first duty is to keep our own houses in order, to carry out the duties of our own stations in life, be good husbands and wives, care properly for our children and teach them, love those within our reach, even though some people are outside of our reach, help ourselves, our families, and our friends to stay sane. A couple of other things. We can counteract the appeal to inappropriate feelings by appealing to appropriate feelings. I talk about that a lot in the book. We can meet lunacies when we do meet them. We can meet them not just with counter arguments, which may never convince anybody, but with sounder, more beautiful visions of how things really are, and then the counter-arguments begin to make sense to them. Just having the courage to describe these beauties can be transformative, and it can even happen that at the very last, the longing for beauty overcomes the fear of beauty that, yes, we have. And here's a hard one. We can repent. Those three words are enough to move some people to turn off the radio program and to throw away the book. I hope they won't. But I think that we need to do that. It's great to know that we can turn away from lunacy. Nothing requires deluded thinking. We're not in chains. And if there is such a thing as God, there is such a thing as grace.
You've got me thinking about that phrase, the expulsive power of the better affection.
Yes,
and
that's right. We have, our feelings themselves all have purposes. Even the feeling of anger, properly framed, it's there. It exists in order to arouse us to the ordinate defense against of things that threaten what is good. Now, most of the time, of course, when we get angry, we're having inappropriate anger, and that's not what we're doing. But even anger in that way can be good. So we tend to think that feelings are either all good or else they're all bad. No. All of them can be good if they're toward the right people, for the right reasons, in the right ways, on the right occasions, in the right manners. And that's what we have to learn.
Mm. I love how, again, your plain duties that you talk about in the conclusion. Not everything has to be the big thing. Just doing those.
Not everything has to be the big thing. We can, especially those of us who are aware of politics and engaged with us. It isn't good to just disengage from that and pay no attention to it. But you can go to the opposite extreme and be so obsessed with that you don't pay attention to your family. Don't your kid comes up and says, "Will you read me a story, Daddy?" And you say, No, I'm listening to the television about an outrage.
Yeah.
Okay, give the time to your child,
Yeah.
or you're just getting into one of those lunacies yourself.
Yeah. Got about another minute or so, and you dedicated this book to your grandfather, who you say always asked the right questions. Tell us about your granddad.
My grandfather was a Baptist minister. He was, I think, the first minister of a Polish-speaking congregation in the United States. I used to talk with him for hours and hours. It was from him that I really learned the gospel, and I revere him. He asked me, when I was immersed in lunacies myself, he asked me some good questions, which cut me to the bone and helped me to start thinking.
Mm-hmm.
He was a wonderful man.
Yeah.
And it's another one of the reasons I think family is great. And the witness of parents and grandparents to their children, don't understate it. Even if your children wander, if you teach them well enough, then when they get ready to come back, they'll know how. Yeah.
You should just teach a course on asking the right questions. Because oftentimes we, in our apologetic, if you wish, we sometimes ask questions that miss the mark, or they don't really penetrate the heart. Asking the right questions is, again, something that is very powerful if done well. So, hey, Jay, thank you again for joining us, Jay Bujaszewski. It's not an easy name to say. I'm sorry. Then again,
you've said it correctly, though.
Well, yeah. Anyway, you can find Jay at his website, undergroundthomas.org, his book, Pandemic of Lunacy, How to Think Clearly When Everyone Around Us Seems Crazy. Jay, thanks again for joining us here on The Reconnect.
Thanks for having me on your show.
It's been great. Well, again, this is The Reconnect without Carmen this week. She'll be back next Monday. Real quickly before we go, a reporter recently was asking Jonathan Rumi. There was this big event that they were at together. Rumi, as you know, playing Jesus in the critically acclaimed series The Chosen. The reporter asked him a rather interesting question. What would you do if you knew the date of Jesus' return? His answer? I'm on my knees in prayer. Without hesitation. He'd be on his knees in prayer. Continue praying that we finish strong, that the enemy doesn't get in and try to destroy relationships or shake things up in ways that make it hard to finish. Because that's what the devil will do. Hopefully, as you go through your day, keep things in prayer as well. Receive the blessing as we head out into the day. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and grant you peace. We'll catch you tomorrow here on The Reconnect on Faith Radio.
Thanks for listening to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. Let us know how we can help you more fully reconnect the eternal with the everyday. We want to walk with you throughout your journey of discipleship, so let's connect. You can text us at 877-933-2484 or connect with us online at myfaithradio.com and on all our social media. I look forward to connecting with you as we each seek to reconnect the eternal with the everyday.